So welcome everyone. I'm so grateful that you're here. I will read to you a bio about our speaker that we have the benefit of interacting with today. Her name is Sylvia Marcos. She is a PhD and the founder and senior researcher of the Seminario Permanente de Antropología y Género at the Institute for Anthropological Research, Universidad Nacional Autonomía excuse me, de Mexico, UNAM. She is the author of many books, including Taken from the Lips, Gender and Eros in Mesoamerican Religions, 2006, and co-edited volume, Dialogue and Difference, Feminism's Challenge Globalization. Indigenous Women in Decolonial Cosmovision and Religión y Género, Volume 3, Encyclopedia Iberoamericana de Religiones. Beside her publications, she has been actively engaged with the indigenous women's movements in Mexico and Latin America. We really are honored to welcome her to Pacific Lutheran University today. And as I mentioned a moment ago, she also was willing to open up the invitation list. So my co-editor of the book, Valuing Lives, Healing Earth, Teresa Ugar, is here with us with many of her students. Welcome, Teresa. And so we have truly a unique opportunity to learn from and appreciate the insight of Dr. Sylvia Marcos to the study of gender, because the kinds of emergent studies in gender in North America have a very interesting interaction with the sorts of insights that she has discerned from her work with indigenous communities in the contemporary time, as well as her research into early colonial understandings of indigenous traditions. So it's truly an honor to welcome Sylvia Marcos today. As you may notice, we have the captions on. We also have the recording on, so those are things to note. For students from my class, you are welcome to open up the discussion questions Google Doc, which is linked to your course information. And into that Google Doc, you can add questions for our speaker. We have about 40 minutes of lecture and 20 minutes of discussion after that. All right, so welcome everyone, and I will pass the mic along to our guest speaker. Welcome, Sylvia Marcos.
Thank you very much. Well, I thank you very much. You know that I have a remembrance of Sarah. She was one of my very brilliant students many years ago. So I am very happy to follow her life and seeing her fully a professor and teaching and getting through all these connections and comprehension of Mesoamerican peoples, which are the indigenous people of Mexico. The indigenous people, if you have read some of the articles that were part of what was the previous lecture, I will go back to the article that speaks about duality and gender fluidity. And I think, because you are students, I think it is very important to first of all, open up your mind to a concept of gender that's not fixed and static. Men are not here, women are not there. You know, it's not like they are two separate realities. It's not how generally we know about men and women, or gender studies are masculine studies, or on women, on studies on women. And here we have a world that I think is very rich, that we can learn a lot from, where the basic construction of gender is a gender that's permanently fluid. It's always going from male to female and from female to male. And this is what I will be presenting excerpts to you. The important thing that you need to know is, or the important background you need to understand my writing, or I sent the article translated to English, not a finished English translation, but you can always go back and read it and check whatever you will be hearing from me. And you can ask questions when I finish. But the most important thing is to know that there are social organizations that, or cultural organizations that are able to keep a gender identity that's permanently fluid. And this means it's not exactly what we in our society call lesbian, gay, LGBT, you know, transgender, bisexual. All of these divisions or nominations of gender identity are proper to our society. But in indigenous communities, it is not, it's not the prevalent way of conceiving gender. It's not the prevalent way of conceiving being a woman and being a man. So then when people come to visit, and if you ever can come to visit Mexico, and you come to visit an indigenous town, or you come to visit the Zapatistas, which are the most interesting people to study, and which I have been close to them, because they are building their political position on concepts of gender that are fluid. It means there is an oscillation, a permanent change. So it means, because just imagine lesbian and gay are themselves static positions. Within Zapatismo, and this is what I will try to talk to you, and we'll see if you can pick it up from me, or you can read the article I sent to Sarah to fully comprehend. So what it means is that a person is not permanently gay, or is not permanently lesbian. It is a category that is permanently fluid. So in a lifetime, or in a week's time, sometime, there is a change from being sexually attractive to the same sex or to another sex. So it is very difficult for our minds to capture this well. And I hope I can explain how the concept of Otroa within Zapatista struggle is a very indigenous, contemporary, political, indigenous movement. So Zapatismo emerges with this concept. Otroa, you see, niñoa from child, compañeroa from my compañero. So it has, for all the positions social positions, a place for a non-fixed gender identity. It means this Otroa is permanently fluidly between being a woman and being a man, and being both at the same time. And this is the most difficult thing to understand, but I am trying to explain this in my article. But the important thing to pick up from this, I think, to me, as a researcher, the important thing is that it offers a solution to the conflicts we have today with all these differences of the movement that's claiming for justice, which is a movement I support fully, of lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual, intersexual, etc. I fully support this movement. It is a movement that needs to exist in society as we live it today, in urban society. But let's take a peek at the indigenous communities. This is what I am inviting you to do. Just go and look a little bit beyond your own world, your own sex gender world, and try to get an intimate vision of how the indigenous people live their gender identity. And this is all I want to do with you today, helping you to visualize, to experience, or to comprehend, because experience, no, you have to live it, but at least to comprehend deeply what it means to be in a place that's not feminine, not masculine, and it is at the same time masculine and feminine. And this exists in the languages, in the Mayan languages of Southeast Mexico and Guatemala. There is terminology, winak, that means man, woman. It means person. It doesn't have to be defined as man or as woman. It is first defined as person. A person that is at the same time feminine and masculine. And it's very difficult for you to understand it, but let me see if I read some parts of my of my article. Maybe we can make a conversation and you can ask questions, and feel free to ask questions, because this is not something we are doing something that in decolonial studies is called an epistemical rupture, an epistemological rupture. Why? Because we are breaking the gender definition. We are breaking from it, and we contend as the colonial theorists that this capacity of being both man and woman at the same time, of being a person that's both masculine and feminine, or being a person that's permanently oscillating between the feminine and the masculine, this was one capacity of the indigenous peoples of the Americas, not only of Mexico, but my studies are all founded on Mexican materials, on Mesoamerican, what's called Mesoamerican. Those I cannot extend the assurance, but I do have many citations from Native American people or the indigenous people of South America, the Mapuche, the Quechua, all these varieties of indigenous, not varieties, all these multiple identities, indigenous identities from South America. I have examples where this that I'm speaking to you about in Mexico is also true among Native Americans in Canada, Native Americans in the US, and all the Americas. So let's focus on this important issue. The important issue is that the colonizers brought a gender identity that forced us as women to be inferior. Why? Because man is more capable, is stronger, etc. All these binary definitions of female and male, these stereotypical definitions of male and female, this is not proper to the peoples of the Americas. This is one thing I want you to go away from this lecture with clarity. You can read my 11 books I have written, or you can read 11 books written by many other researchers where you will find enough information, enough rigorous academic information and analysis that shows that the people of the Americas were colonized specifically on gender issues. And this story of we women being inferior and men being superior and stronger, this is a story that colonization brought to the whole of the Americas, to Canada, to the US, to Mexico, and to Central America, and to South America. All the Americas had a very diverse gender conception or gender vivencias. Their lives were organized around a gender balance between feminine and masculine. And this is what I propose to do in this article. And why do I propose this? Because paradoxically, I can say that many years ago, when I was doing documentary research, that is in the article you read, duality, fluidity, all this article that you have to read as a background, this is basically based on documentary research. What does it mean, documentary research? It means going to the first chronicles, the first reports, the first histories that were written by the colonizers when they arrived in Mexico and in North America also, in the region of New Orleans. You know, there was also a French colonization and an English colonization. All these people, Europeans, brought a concept of gender that had nothing to do with the local people they faced. But they were the colonizers, they were the conquerors. So they imposed their own way of conceiving male and female. They imposed it through domination. So what we have today is a domination. We inherited the philosophical domination, the epistemological domination of how you define female and male, or how you define what is proper to women and what is proper to men, and how you define this as a binary. This is what we are criticizing very often in feminist theory, the binaries. Why a binary? And what is very important, and I find very important, is through my ethnographic research. It means not through documentary research, but also through documentary research, but through ethnographic or ethnological research, I find alive in certain indigenous communities of Mexico that I call Mesoamerica, of Mexico, I find still alive the way to conceptualize gender in a fluid manner. This is the whole issue behind my art. I already told you everything you need to know. And the only thing I do in the article is give you examples, concrete examples, citations and examples of how it is lived today, not 500 years ago when decolonization took place. It is still surviving today. Now, I would like to ask to leave a little space to hear if someone has a very concrete question to ask. Because I gave you the full background. Huh? I gave you the full background. What I will be doing next is speaking of Otroa Compañeroa, which is how today it is lived in indigenous, you call them tribes in the US. We don't like to use of tribes, the term tribe, we use communities. So in communities, indigenous communities today, how it is lived, I can go ahead and explain to you and read excerpts of how it is lived today, inspired in ancestral traditions, which are still surviving today, how it is lived today in one indigenous group of political activity, zapatismo, that is formed out of 5 indigenous identities: Tzotzil, Celtal, Chol, Tojolabal, y Zoque. Those 5 indigenous identities are behind the Otroa concept that is lived today in Chiapas. Okay? So if you have a question, Teresa, maybe you have a question.
I actually do. So I'm Catholic, and you're talking about the colonial experience. So I'm just wondering, I'm wondering any insights about Christianity and the colonial experience, and was it a double oppression because of individuals coming from another region in the world, but then them believing in a male God?
Well, of course, colonization was Christianity. Christianity, one sort of Christianity, another denomination or one denomination. But of course, in Mexico, it was Catholicism, of course. Huh? So what I have is also a very strong criticism of the values, of the gender values that arrived to Mexico through Catholic evangelization. Through the, and then many issues that were not considered a sin for the local people were considered a sin and a fault for the Spanish colonizers. And evidently, you know, if you are interested in knowing more about this, I do recommend you to read my book, Taken from the Lips, because in this book I cite literally excerpts from the local colonizers or priests or frailes. How do you say frailes in
The
English?
friars?
Friars. The friars wrote extensively, and then you see what how the friars evaluated the sexual and gender activities of the local people. And then there you notice that there was a very demeaning interpretation, inferiorizing, considering it had to change, it had to be a sin, which for local people it was not a sin. What is very interesting, not only this concerning the sin, but also what I find more important for us, I grew up a Catholic in Mexico, so I went to Catholic school with many Catholic nuns teaching me, and I had a spiritual director that was a priest, so I was very Catholic, you know. And what is important to recognize here is that the enterprise of conquest and colonization was, how can I say, was supported by Catholicism, was supported and implemented by Catholic beliefs and practices. And that if there had not been this Catholicism, it might have been different, you know, the kind of contact between cultures. But never mind, I mean, we are dealing with whatever happened in history. So what we are doing now is that we have now, and this is very true, I am very connected with this, there is a very radical Catholic proposition to mend the errors of decolonization. And and I am writing about this. I'm writing about Teología India, Indian theology. And there is Don Samuel Ruiz, there is a whole lot of very Catholic people today in Mexico that are very opposed to what the conquerors and the colonizers did with the indigenous population. And there is now a kind of repentance and trying to correct the abuses of violence. So there is this very small number of people. I am part of this. I am writing on this too. But the first step to do this is to recognize where the moral connotations of Catholicism and colonization, where they did wrong to the people then 500 years ago or 540 years ago. They did wrong to the local people then, but there are remains today. And those remains today are where I am writing to, you know. I'm writing to clarify for the remains of the colonization and conquest, to recognize the values, the enormous values that were wiped away from the indigenous populations. And I am also writing about how the indigenous peoples then, through their inheritors, through 540 years of history, how they have kept secretly the beliefs and practices of their and nuestros antiguos, they say in Spanish, the indigenous people. Estamos guardando, recuperando lo que nuestros antiguos nos enseñaron. So there is this double reality today. There is the colonizers' reality, but from the colonized, this is my Otroa article. My Otroa article, you can place it exactly in the voices of the indigenous people that kept in secret through 540 years of colonization, kept in secret the values of this bigender or the gender fluidity, or the possibility of being man and woman at the same time, which is something that, you know, people will say, anyone, you know, common people will say, that's crazy. No, they are either man or woman. They cannot be both. But you know, it's not crazy. It is in the tradition of the ancient peoples it is still alive in certain places. And I speak about one certain place where this is true. 5 indigenous communities, Soques, Otzil, Celtal, Chol, and Tocolabal, that are keeping preciously this capacity to be both male and female in a gender fluid way, in a life, in their practices today, in the practices that could be considered purely political, but they are decolonizing political. Okay?
Sarah,
I answered you,
Sylvia.
Teresa.
Adriana, one of my students, has a question.
Yes, I saw questions. Sorry, I have not, I am very immersed in what I'm saying, and you have to consider that I don't speak English every day. I had not spoken in English, but I write in English every day. I have published 4 articles very lately. The last months, 4 articles on these issues. I have all in English, and I wrote them in English. So I do read and write in English, but I do not speak English. So I feel a little uneasy with English.
Your English is perfect. Adriana, will you ask the question? Do you have a mic, please? If you have a mic.
I was wondering how would gender identity and sexuality be defined and conceptualized if there was no interference from religion? What other forces would mold those terms / definitions?
Can you repeat the question loud and slow?
Oh, of course, sorry. How would gender identity and sexuality be defined and conceptualized if there was no interference from religion? What other forces would mold those terms / definitions?
If there was no religion, you mean? If there was no influence of religion?
Correct. What other forces would you say would have a big impact on?
This is very good question. Because what we are trying to do, and this is politically today, is to allow the collectivity to speak about it, because there is a collective voice in every community. So, and there is many decisions that are made and many conceptions of being man and woman and being sexually active or not, or what is considered proper or not. It's all a decision of collectivities. It's not a personal decision. It's not a religious decision. It is the collectivity that it's the collectivity that fashions the response. Now, how this is done, there are all these asambleas comunales. People know each other. There is a very strong vínculo between each person in the community.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I have.
You need some water?
Sí. Otra pregunta. There was another question.
Yes, one of my students has asked, it seems so logical to think of people as people first and men and women second. So why do we tend to classify everything, literally everything, by gender first? Certain colors are considered boyish or girlish, even the way.
I'm not hearing you well. I have a very bad transmission, sorry.
Okay, no problem. So my student is asking about thinking about people as people first and gendered second, and issues of classification by gender first.
Yeah.
Even the way we move our bodies, fold our knees, the colors that we see may be gendered, and why, she asks, is it gender first?
Yes. Why is it gender first? Well, this is our culture, huh? Or this is the way we are defined in our culture, in our urban culture or religious culture. We are first man or woman, and then secondly a person. Because then I don't, how can I say, it's a very valid question to ask it from your background. You know, why first we are man or woman, and then in a binary, because this is what feminist theoreticians, we are always questioned. Why is this binary that it's either man or either woman? And there is a hand here, Rosalinda Reina is asking.
Hi. My question is similar, but my question is, why did they identify at the beginning, in the beginning of when you were
A little bit louder because I have a bad transmission, sorry.
okay, in the beginning, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, just a little slower.
Okay. In the beginning, you mentioned that the tribe likes to be called people, persons,
Mhm.
right? Why is that?
I'm not sure I understand your question,
You know
Rosalinda.
how they don't like to be called she, he? They like to be identified as people.
So as I understand it, the question is about why do they prefer to be known as people first rather than gendered beings first? Is it
Why
a
do
matter
they
of preference?
Well, they prefer, in my article, in my research, Otroa means you are both. Huh? I'm referring to my research, Rosalinda. Huh?
Okay.
This Otroa fuses both identities. It is both man and woman. Not usually. It doesn't mean everyone thinks of himself like that in the community. It is one option, you know.
Optional.
I'm very glad that I could clarify this. The important issue, Rosalinda, is that you have an option, you know. You don't have to fit yourself as a woman or fit yourself as a man. You have the option to be both at the same time.
Oh, I understand. Now it's optional.
That's a freedom for being. And this is proper of the people, of the cultures, of the indigenous cultures. It's not the way they educate us in school. In school, you either are a man or a woman. And there are schools only for women, and there are schools only for men. Till very recently, when I went to Harvard, Harvard had Radcliffe, because Harvard was only for men. And I came into this project that was very innovative in 1980s, where there was a women's studies in religion program at Harvard, at the men's institution, and not at Radcliffe, that was the women's institution. And then it's very interesting how this change has been happening within the same cultural settings that we have in the West, or in the dominant thought. there has been changes, very slowly changes, to banish this separation. Huh? But in these indigenous communities, you have the option. It's free, up to you. And it's accepted politically. And it's accepted collectively. You are not called in a special name as it happens with us, that we have the lesbian, gay, transgender. We need all of this to explain the variation. And in the indigenous communities, it's part of what it is. And this is why they don't use a particular name, they just use Otroa. You can explain what Otra means, Teresa, maybe? Otra, Otro?
Otro, you, it's in the title of your presentation, right?
Yes, but Otro, what does Otro means? It means another, I
Yeah.
remember that. It's another.
It's other. Yeah.
So they leave it, free. It's male, female, and another. And another in children, another in people working the land, another in people fighting for justice, it's another open.
Sylvia, do the communities, the indigenous communities, do they use that term, or is that just something within academia that is kind of, oh, Sylvia, I was just asking, do indigenous communities use that term?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
It's where I'm picking it up, Teresa.
Okay. No, I
I'm
just wanted
trying to explain what Otroa, which
Mhm.
is another Oa, means to people like us that we do not belong to the community. So what does it mean to us? It means we can be every place, feminine or masculine or both at the time. This is why studying or rereading the article on duality and fluidity and equilibrium in my book can give a philosophical background or a philosophical epistemic, we call it in the colonial studies. We can give it an epistemic backbone to that, because it means, you are not neither man, neither woman, both at the same time. It's what it means for the collectivity. And it's also, you have an article that Sarah recommended, or Sarah found, an article about the Mushe in Oaxaca, which means this is Zapotec community. It's another region of Mexico, another indigenous region where this dual fusion exists also. So it means that it's not, it disappeared in many parts of Mexico, but it is still kept in many other indigenous communities. And what it can tell us, I mean, to me, I was very happy, very joyful to find this term, because it stops the static implication on being a man or a woman. And we know this by many, how do you say, experiences of gay people or lesbian people, that how they have generational changes. And there are men that become gay till they are 70. And so this has an explanation. And these are changes that are biologically studied. The hormonal changes, and this all has a solid standpoint on biology, on hormonal changes, on the generation, the life trajectory. So it is something that culturally has not been well adapted in our Western culture or in our contemporary dominant culture. It has not followed closely enough the changes that are already in nature. Huh? There are people that are born with both feminine and masculine parts, or how do you say? Well, there are people that are born with both. So in nature, there is already a fusion. The culture has not known what to do with that. Huh? The culture. So they are operating radically people that do not fit between being a man or a woman. They are both physically man and woman. So there is a lack in our culture to categorize this kind of person. And the indigenous culture has it very easy. It says Otroa, it's another, finish. Don't make more stories. Don't complicate it more. They can be here or there, okay. And they can be man and woman at the same time, okay. It's okay for the culture, for the indigenous cultures. Huh? And they even have rituals in the Mushe in Oaxaca, have La Vela. La Vela means a festival. It's a festival of all these Mushes that are neither man nor woman. Lori? So,
I wanted to offer a time check, Sylvia. We have about 10 more minutes of your lecture, and I have one student who had a question that she was going to offer. I don't know whether other people have questions or what else you'd like to do with the time.
I am a little worried, Sarah, because I'm getting little messages here that don't stay long enough so I can answer.
Well, don't worry about those. I'm managing those.
You
So
are getting them. Okay.
yes.
So
Yes.
you will be voicing them to me.
Yes, here, maybe I'll read 2 questions for you and then you can answer those and say whatever else you'd like to offer. I have my student's question. How does existence within gender fluidity reflect on gendered division of labor in Indigenous communities? In the article in Valuing Lives, Healing Earth by another author, Issues of Women Weavers in Chiapas, comes up. And then another question that's been asked on the chat. What advice?
Sarah, just to be sure I am understanding the question.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You are speaking about the labor. Let me answer each question, please, because
okay, no problem.
Otherwise it's all mixed up. Huh? So
of course.
The first question was about labor, no?
Yes. So how do gendered labor assumptions relate to this non-binary element of gender?
Yeah, what I can answer this question immediately. What happens is that the labor, it can be chosen by this Otroa whether he wants to do one type of labor that is closer to being a woman, or he can choose the labor that's closer to being a man. But there is a fluidity. She can have the choice. See, it's not regimented, it's not regulated fixedly. Remember fluidity, remember. So now if you ask me another question,
So what I understand is there are divisions of labor by gender, but those in the third gender category have the ability to go to
Have
one
the
side or
ability.
the other.
They are allowed to choose.
Okay.
They are accepted whatever they want to do, whatever they want to do.
Okay, wonderful. So another question on the chat, what advice can you give to someone that is beginning their feminist scholar journey from your experience?
What, someone that is starting this feminist, what?
For a feminist scholar who's beginning, what would be your advice from your experience?
Someone that's beginning to be a feminist.
A feminist scholar, yeah.
Feminist identity.
Feminist identity as a scholar, yeah.
¿As a qué? As what?
Sylvia, Sylvia, my student is asking, so she's starting right now as a feminist scholar. She's asking, what advice would you give to her?
Because she's starting to be a feminist scholar.
Yes, uh-huh.
Okay. I chose studying indigenous cultures and how they defended from colonization and how they have many values. And I chose this. My whole life is discovering or making evident the values of the indigenous cultures before the conquest of Mexico. And why? Because of a social justice that I had as a scholar. I said, social justice, let's study, let's comprehend deeply those that are marginalized and considered inferior and considered less in our society. So it is a political choice, my choice. So you can choose whatever you find that appeals to you. It needs to be interesting for you, or it needs to deal with a part of you. I think I had a grandmother that was Tlaxcalteca, that she was very dark in color and looking very indigenous. And she married my grandfather, who was a migrant from Palestine, but he was a blue-eyed migrant from Palestine. So he didn't look Palestinian either. He looked more like Irish. So then she had this grandmother had a first daughter that was my mother, that came out all blonde with white skin and looking completely white. And my mother discriminated her mother because she looked Indian. And I could notice this when I was a very small child, 5 or 6 years old. So because my grandmother was considered the less person because she was dark and indigenous looking. And I remember that this hurt me deeply very much because I loved my grandmother. And I think that gave me, this is a very personal experience, but I think this led me to study the values of these marginalized and depreciated and discriminated against minority, because she was my grandmother. And I never looked like indigenous myself. So it was like a choice out of a personal experience. So I would counsel everyone that wants to follow a path. I would ask, find something in your experience in life that will help you to commit yourself completely. And find I think all of you, because of the schools where you are studying, you are committed to social justice. So search to be an excellent scholar with a social justice implication. That's what I would counsel you. Excellent scholar, excellent academic, but committed politically and socially.
What a wonderful statement and call to each of us as we're completing our time. We have 2 more minutes, Sylvia. I wonder if you would offer just a little bit more before we're done.
Maybe a little bit more what, Sarah? On what?
Whatever you would like to say to conclude your talk today.
No, I would say that academic life has been very criticized. For example, Zapatista is a social political movement for justice, and they are built on the traditions of the indigenous people. This is the first political movement that builds on the indigenous cultures. So I got completely committed to this movement because it shared my own commitments. I found the whole movement that was exactly doing what I had been doing also as a scholar. So I would recommend to find something that can elude the sterility of academia. I think academia per se is very often sterile, or how do you pronounce this, Teresa?
Sterile.
Sterile for political and for justice issues. So the thing I would say, I would close with this: find a way in your scholarship that can make a difference for social justice issues. That's what I would say. That's what I have done all my life.
I want to say, okay, just,
Did you want to say something?
I just
quickly?
want to say, Sylvia, you inspire me, and the things that you've said, they give me chills. And I think that you have inspired the students too. So I appreciate you being online today with us.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Teresa. Teresa, we have been linked for a long time also. And Sarah was one of my brilliant students. So this is why I wanted to share with your students, because you two were very close to the issues I was already discussing these issues, but I continue, although I am getting older, I always find another space where to study this. And so now I focused on this Otroa issue, because it's very important politically, because it was an Otroa that led the travesía to Europe of the Zapatistas. It was the first person that was encommended by Zapatismo to present the Zapatista movement in Europe. Imagine the important place this identity Otroa has for the political issues of Zapatismo. It fuses gender justice, and it fuses political justice and social justice. So it was something that called my attention powerfully, and I started doing my research already 4 or 5 years ago. What I'm presenting in this article has many years behind, 4 or 5 years of research. It's my last part. It's the part you didn't know because we were not together. Because we were before together. Okay.
All right. Well, I'm so grateful to you for the tremendous commitment that you've offered to Indigenous communities through your scholarship, that your scholarship has been this act of solidarity and listening and care, in addition to being an excellent scholar, careful and doing qualitative data analysis, as well as, colonial document analysis. It's truly an honor and a privilege to have you speak with our students today. And thank you so very much for your call to feminist scholarship and your work that is so inspirational. Maybe we can all give her a virtual round of applause.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Very glad to see faces. Huh? I did a click to see only faces. Okay, so we say goodbye. Huh?
Sylvia, can we take a picture?
Huh?
Can we take a picture? Would you mind?
No, great, take a picture.
Okay. Are the people online okay?
Before taking a picture, yeah, you're very welcome to take a picture. Anyone who does not wish to be
Yes,
in
you
the
can
picture,
take
you
picture.
have the choice to go off your
If
video.
you send me the pictures,
I will.
take pictures, okay? But you send them to me,
I
okay?
will. Okay. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay. I did a screenshot, so I'll send it to you right now.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
Oh, well, take good care, Teresa, Dr. Ugar,
we keep
and
in
Dr.
touch.
Marcos.
If the students want to write to me and to ask me questions or to follow up, I'm open, okay?
You're the best.
That's very generous. Thank you so much.
Yes, this is one of my fights against sterile academia.
I like that term.
To be
Yes.
available politically too. Okay?
Okay.
Wonderful.
So I see. Goodbye.
Okay.
I will
Bye.
now.
Take good care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.